I never expected that a 7-hour flight in a cramped metal tube, my own personal version of hell, would be the place my life finally began. My world was a carefully curated collection of straight lines and predictable outcomes. As a graphic designer, I spent my days aligning pixels, choosing harmonious color palettes, and creating order out of digital chaos. My apartment was minimalist, my schedule was rigid, and my heart was a fortress, well-guarded and meticulously maintained. Flying was the ultimate violation of that order. It was a surrender of control I endured only when absolutely necessary, a teeth-gritting exercise in managed panic, fueled by noise-canceling headphones and a deep-seated belief that if I just held my breath during takeoff, I could somehow help keep the plane in the air. He arrived late. The boarding process was nearly complete, and the seat next to me, 17B, had remained a blissful, empty space, a small pocket of extra room I had already claimed in my mind. Then, a presence filled the aisle. I felt it before I saw it. A shift in the air, a subtle warmth. He was tall, broad in a way that seemed to shrink the already narrow confines of the plane, and moved with an unhurried grace that was entirely at odds with the frantic energy of a final boarding call. He gave a soft, apologetic smile to the person he had to slide past, and the smile was like a low-wattage light bulb turning on in the dim cabin, warm and unassuming. Then he was next to me. He settled into his seat with a quiet sigh, the fabric of his dark gray sweater whispering against the cheap upholstery. The space between us, once a comfortable buffer, vanished. It was now occupied by the solid line of his arm, the breadth of his shoulder, and a scent that cut through the sterile, recycled air of the cabin. It was sandalwood, I thought, and something else. Something clean and warm, like soap or fresh linen, a scent that spoke of quiet mornings and deliberate calm. It was the antithesis of the cold sweat beating on my own neck. I risked a glance. His profile was strong, all clean angles, and a jaw that could have been carved from granite. His hair was dark and cut short, and a few stray strands fell across his forehead as he leaned down to stow his bag. He was, in the objective, art-historical sense of the word, beautiful. He was a piece of classical sculpture placed unexpectedly in the economy section of a transatlantic flight. And like a sculpture in a museum, he was something to be admired from a respectful distance, behind a velvet rope of social convention and my own deeply ingrained timidity. The most prominent barrier, of course, was the one I erected instantly and automatically. He was a man like this, confident and effortlessly masculine. He was, therefore, an exhibit in a gallery I was not allowed to touch. My internal monologue kicked into its usual gear, a frantic cataloging of details that served as both a form of admiration and a reinforcement of the distance between us. I noted the way his large hands rested on his thighs, fingers long and capable. An architect, maybe, or an engineer. Someone who built things, tangible and real, while I spent my life manipulating light on a screen. He pulled out a thick paperback, the cover worn, and the simple act of him opening it seemed so profoundly self-assured. He didn't fumble with a phone or distract himself with the in-flight entertainment system. He just settled in, opened his book, and began to read, creating a small, quiet bubble of civilization in the midst of the mechanical chaos. The plane began its taxi, and my own internal systems went on high alert. My hands gripped the armrests, my knuckles white. I stared straight ahead at the seat back in front of me, focusing on a tiny, imperceptible stain on the fabric, making it the anchor for my rising panic. The engines whined, the pitch increasing to a deafening roar that vibrated through the floor, up my legs, and into the base of my skull. This was the part one hated most. The violent, unnatural thrust that pinned me to my seat, the moment where gravity felt like a suggestion the plane was aggressively arguing with. My breathing grew shallow. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. I was acutely aware of him beside me, a calm, solid mass of tranquility. He hadn't even looked up from his book. He just turned a page, his movements economical and smooth, utterly unbothered by the fact that we were currently hurtling down a strip of tarmac in a multi-ton projectile. The sheer injustice of his calm was almost as unsettling as the takeoff itself. It highlighted my own frayed nerves, making me feel small and ridiculous. The wheels left the ground. The familiar, gut-wrenching drop in my stomach followed, and I squeezed my eyes shut. I tried to focus on my breathing, on the techniques my therapist had taught me. In for 4, hold for 7, out for 8. But the numbers jumbled in my head, lost in the roar of the engines and the frantic thumping in my chest. I felt a bead of sweat trickle down my temple. The fortress was crumbling. The carefully constructed walls of my composure were being breached. We leveled out. The seatbelt sign pinged off, and the cabin settled into the monotonous drone of a long-haul flight. I forced myself to relax my grip on the armrests, my palms slick and cold. I risked another look at him. He was still reading, a small, thoughtful frown creasing his brow as he absorbed the words on the page. He was a world away, lost in his own narrative, and I was just the anxious stranger in the seat next to him, an insignificant detail in his periphery. For the next few hours, this would be the status quo. I would sit here, a bundle of nerves and quiet yearning, and he would sit there, a monument to a life I could only imagine, existing in parallel but never intersecting. The thought was both a comfort and a profound source of loneliness. The first jolt was minor, a little pocket of rough air that made the drink cart rattle down the aisle. I tensed, my body instantly rigid. It was fine. This was normal. I repeated the words in my head like a mantra. This is normal. But then came a second jolt, sharper this time, followed by a sudden, sickening drop that lifted me a few inches from my seat. A collective gasp rippled through the cabin. My carefully chanted mantra shattered into a million pieces. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, calm and clipped, something about unexpected weather patterns and a request for passengers and crew to return to their seats. His professional placidity did nothing to soothe the primal fear that had just seized me. The plane shuddered again, a violent, bone-jarring vibration that felt like it was trying to shake itself apart in midair. The lights flickered. Someone behind me let out a small, terrified cry. And that was it. The floor fell out of my world. My vision tunneled, the edges blurring into a dark, indistinct haze. The roar of the engines was now inside my head, a deafening white noise that drowned out everything else. My breath hitched in my throat, trapped. I couldn't exhale. My chest was a band of iron, tightening, crushing the air from my lungs. Cold dread washed over me, slick and oily. This is it. This is how it ends. The thought was stark and clinical, stripped of all emotion except a pure, animal terror. A voice cut through the noise. A low, rumbling sound, close to my ear. Hey, are you okay? I couldn't turn my head. I was frozen, staring at the back of the seat, my entire being focused on the single, impossible task of drawing a breath. Hey, look at me. The voice was gentle but firm. A warm weight settled on my arm, just above the elbow. The touch was grounding, a point of heat in the encroaching ice of my panic. My name is Alex. What's yours? The simple question was a lifeline. It required a response, an act of cognitive function that momentarily disrupted the feedback loop of my fear. I managed to force a name out, a strangled, barely audible whisper. Leo. Okay, Leo. The warmth on my arm remained. I need you to breathe with me. Can you do that? Just match my breathing. In. I felt the slow, steady expansion of his chest next to me. And out I tried. My first attempt was a ragged, desperate gasp, but he was patient. That's it. Try again. Slow. In and out. He kept his voice low and even, a calm rhythm beneath the chaotic symphony of the groaning fuselage and the rattling cabin. Slowly, painstakingly, I began to sync my breathing to his. The iron band around my chest loosened its grip, just a fraction. Air, real air, started to reach my lungs. The plane gave another violent lurch, and a fresh wave of panic threatened to pull me under. But his hand was still there, a steady pressure on my arm. His thumb began to move, drawing slow, deliberate circles on the fabric of my sleeve. The repetitive motion was hypnotic, pulling my focus away from the shaking of the plane and anchoring it to that single point of contact. Tell me something you're looking forward to, he said, his voice a quiet constant. When we land. Anything. What's the first thing you're going to do? My mind was a blank slate, wiped clean by fear. The first thing? Getting on solid ground. Never getting on a plane again. I shook my head, unable to form words. Okay, he said, undeterred. I'll go first. I'm an architect. I'm flying out for a final site inspection on a library I designed. It's been 3 years of work. The first thing I'm going to do is walk into the main reading room. I want to stand in the middle of it and just listen. To the quiet, he spoke about the library. He described the way the light would fall through the high, clear-story windows in the late afternoon, the smell of the white oak paneling and the new books, the specific acoustic design meant to absorb sound and create a sense of profound peace. His words painted a picture, a calm, ordered, beautiful space, a sanctuary. And as he spoke, the chaos around me began to recede. The turbulence was still there, the plane still bucked and shuddered, but it was as if he had built a small, soundproof room for us in the middle of the storm. His scent, the sandalwood and clean linen, was stronger now that he was closer, and it filled my senses, overriding the smell of fear and stale air. I was hyper-aware of everything about him. The warmth radiating from his body, a stark contrast to my own icy skin. The subtle vibration of his voice as it traveled from his chest, through his arm, and into my own. The texture of his sweater beneath my fingertips where my hand had unconsciously drifted to brace itself against his armrest. He talked for what felt like an eternity, his low voice a steady balm. He told me about his childhood dream of building things, a self-deprecating story about a disastrous treehouse project that involved more nails than wood. He asked me about my work, and I found myself telling him about the quiet satisfaction of finding the perfect font, of aligning elements on a page until they clicked into a place of visual harmony. We were just two strangers, sharing small, mundane pieces of our lives, but in the context of the shuddering plane, it felt like the most profound intimacy I had ever known. He had revealed a crack in his perfect, confident facade. He admitted he used to be terrified of public speaking, that his hands would shake so badly he couldn't hold his notes during his first big presentation. Felt a lot like this, actually, he confessed, with a wry, sideways glance at me. Like the world was shaking apart and everyone was watching me. That small admission changed everything. He wasn't a sculpture in a museum anymore. He was human. He had fears. He had vulnerabilities. And in that moment, my quiet, distant admiration deepened into something else, something warmer and more terrifying, a genuine connection. The turbulence finally began to ease. The violent shudders softened into a gentler rocking, and the roar of the wind against the fuselage subsided. The captain came on the intercom again, his voice still impossibly calm, announcing that we were through the worst of it. A wave of relieved applause and chatter broke out in the cabin. The crisis was over. But Alex didn't move his hand. It was still resting on my arm, his thumb still tracing those slow, soothing circles. The gesture was no longer one of simple, practical comfort for a panicked stranger. The emergency had passed. Its purpose was fulfilled, and yet it remained. The air in our small space grew thick, charged with a new kind of tension. The noise of the cabin faded away again, and all I could hear was the frantic, but now hopeful, beating of my own heart. The cabin lights had been dimmed for the overnight portion of the flight, casting everything in a soft, blue-gray twilight. It was a liminal space, suspended between destinations, between night and day, away from the real world. In the dimness, his eyes found mine. He was closer than I realized. I could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, could feel the warmth of his breath on my cheek. His gaze was steady, questioning. He wasn't looking at me with pity. It was something else. An open, vulnerable curiosity that mirrored my own. The world had shrunk to the few inches between us. The other 200 passengers, the hum of the engines, the thousands of feet of empty air below us, it all ceased to exist. "You okay now?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. The words were simple, but the question hanging in the air between us was anything but. He wasn't just asking about the turbulence. He was asking about this, about the hand on my arm, about the look in his eyes, about the undeniable current that was flowing between us. I couldn't speak. I could only nod, a small, jerky movement. My entire body felt like a live wire. His eyes flickered down to my lips for a fraction of a second, and then back up to meet my gaze. It was the briefest of movements, but it felt like a tectonic shift. It was permission. It was an invitation. Slowly, as if testing the fragility of the moment, he slid his hand from my arm down to my hand, his fingers gently closing around mine. His palm was warm and dry and slightly calloused, the hand of a man who built things. The contact was electric. A jolt, more powerful than any turbulence, shot up my arm and straight to my core. It wasn't a handshake. It wasn't a comforting pat. His fingers laced with mine, a perfect, seamless fit. My mind, usually a chaotic storm of overthinking and anxiety, went utterly silent. There were no words, no analyses, no catastrophic scenarios. There was only this, the impossible, undeniable reality of his hand holding mine. The warmth spread through me, a slow, rising tide, chasing away the last of the icy fear and leaving something new in its place. A fragile, terrifying hope. He gave my hand a gentle squeeze, a silent reassurance. Then he leaned his head back against the seat, closing his eyes, but his hand remained firmly intertwined with mine. He wasn't pulling away. He was staying. He was choosing to stay in this space with me. My own head felt heavy. I let it rest against the headrest, turning my face slightly toward him. In the dim light, I watched the slow, even rise and fall of his chest. He seemed to have fallen asleep, or at least was resting. But his grip on my hand was a constant, warm pressure, a silent declaration that this was real. The walls I had spent a lifetime building, the meticulous order I had clung to for safety, they were gone, annihilated. And in their place was a terrifying, exhilarating emptiness, a blank page. For the first time in my life, I had no idea what was going to happen next. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of it. I closed my eyes, his warmth a beacon in the darkness, and for the first time ever on a plane, I fell asleep. I woke to the bright, artificial glare of the cabin lights being turned on. The spell was instantly broken. The soft, intimate twilight of the night was gone, replaced by the harsh, functional reality of morning. A flight attendant was rattling a cart down the aisle, collecting trash. People were stretching, talking, the mundane sounds of a flight nearing its end. And the warmth was gone from my hand. I looked down. My hand was resting, empty, on my own lap. Alex was awake, sitting upright, his focus entirely on stowing his book in his carry-on bag. He moved with a crisp efficiency, his posture closed off, his shoulders tense. He hadn't just removed his hand. He had retreated, pulling all of his warmth and energy back into himself, leaving a cold, empty void in the space between us. The anxiety came rushing back, a tidal wave of ice water. It had been a dream. No, worse. It had been real, and he regretted it. Of course, he regretted it. He was being kind. He was comforting a hysterical passenger during a rough flight. And I, in my pathetic, touch-starved desperation, had misinterpreted everything. I had taken a simple act of human decency and twisted it into something it was never meant to be. The shame was a physical thing, a hot flush that crept up my neck and burned my cheeks. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to curl up and vanish into the cheap fabric of the seat. He probably thought I was insane. He was probably wondering how to get away from me as quickly as possible once we landed. The silence between us was no longer the comfortable, charged silence of the night. It was a thick, suffocating blanket of awkwardness. My internal prosecutor went into overdrive, presenting a mountain of evidence against me. Exhibit A, his complete avoidance of eye contact. He stared resolutely into his bag, at the seat in front of him, anywhere but at me. Exhibit B, his body language. He was angled away from me now, creating as much physical distance as the cramped seats would allow. The open, inviting posture of last night was gone, replaced by a defensive wall. Exhibit C, the clipped, formal tone he would inevitably use if he was forced to speak to me. I spent the final hour of the flight in a state of self-flagellating torment. I replayed every moment from the night before, dissecting each word, each glance, each tiny movement, and reinterpreting it through the new, harsh lens of regret. His kindness was pity. His vulnerability was a calculated tactic to calm me down. His hand holding mine was a momentary lapse in judgment, an overcorrection in a crisis. The beautiful, fragile thing that had bloomed between us in the dark had been a hallucination, and the morning light revealed it as nothing more than a pathetic weed. The plane landed with a bump and a screech of tires. The forward momentum pressed me into my seat, a final, physical reminder of my foolishness. As we taxied to the gate, Alex was already unbuckling his seatbelt, gathering his things, poised for escape. The man who had moved with such unhurried grace when he boarded was now a study in tense, coiled energy. He just wanted to get away from me. The certainty of it was a lead weight in my stomach. The seatbelt sign went off. The familiar chaos of deplaning erupted. People stood up, grabbing bags from overhead compartments, a crush of bodies all eager to be somewhere else. Alex was one of them, standing in the aisle, his back to me. This was it. He would walk off this plane, and I would never see him again, and this entire episode would become another shameful memory to be locked away in the deepest dungeon of my mind. It was better this way, I told myself. A clean break. No need for an awkward goodbye. I waited in my seat, letting the aisle clear a little, prolonging the inevitable. I watched his back, the broad shoulders under the gray sweater. He took a step forward with the flow of the crowd, then stopped. He hesitated for a moment, and then, impossibly, he turned around. He looked back at me, his expression unreadable. His eyes met mine over the top of the seat. The noise of the cabin, the shuffling of bags, the announcements from the crew, it all faded into a distant hum. "Hey," he said. His voice was low, and I couldn't tell if it was strained or just quiet. My heart hammered against my ribs. Here it comes. The polite dismissal. The "take care," that really means goodbye forever. "Wait for me at the gate?" he asked. It wasn't a demand, but a question, soft and hesitant. "We should. I think we should talk." I braced myself for the impact. "We need to talk," was the universal harbinger of bad news. It was the preamble to rejection, the formal opening to the ceremony of letting someone down easy. I was about to be told, in the kindest way possible, that I had imagined everything. My anxiety spiral had been right all along. But I couldn't say no. I couldn't let it end without the final, painful confirmation. I just nodded, my throat too tight to speak. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod in return, then turned and disappeared into the stream of passengers. The walk to the terminal was a death march. Each step was heavy, laden with dread. I found a spot near our gate, a cluster of empty chairs overlooking the tarmac, and I sat down to await my sentence. The airport was a blur of motion and noise, but I felt strangely detached from it all, enclosed in a bubble of impending doom. He appeared a few minutes later, holding 2 paper cups. He walked over and held one out to me. Coffee. A final, gentle courtesy before the execution. I took it, my hand trembling slightly. "Thank you," I mumbled. He didn't sit in the chair next to me, but instead took the one opposite, so we were facing each other, our knees almost touching. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his thighs, turning the warm cup over and over in his large hands. He stared down into the coffee, as if the words he was looking for were written in the steam. "Look," he started, his voice still low and now laced with an unmistakable nervousness. "Leo, back there, on the plane." He took a deep breath. "I'm sorry if I made things weird this morning." I panicked, I blinked. That was not what I was expecting. He panicked? When I woke up, he continued, finally lifting his eyes to meet mine. And the lights were on, and everything was normal again. I just freaked out. It all felt too real. And I didn't know if it was real for you, too. I thought maybe I'd crossed a line. I thought I might have taken advantage of the situation, of you being scared. I didn't want you to think I was that guy. My mind was struggling to catch up. All my carefully constructed theories, my airtight case for his regret and my own delusion, were dissolving in the face of his confession. He wasn't retreating out of disgust. He was retreating out of fear. The same fear that was currently holding my own tongue hostage. "When I first saw you," he said, a faint flush rising on his neck. "When you were sitting there before I even sat down, I noticed you. And I spent the first hour of that flight trying to work up the courage to say something, anything, and failing miserably. I figured you were straight, and I was just being an idiot." He let out a short, humorless laugh. "My big plan was to say, nice headphones, and hope for the best." Pathetic, right? I saw a picture on his phone's lock screen when he'd first sat down. A brief glimpse of him with a smiling woman, his arm around her. The final nail in the coffin of my presumed straight theory. I thought. "I saw a photo on your phone." I managed to say, the words feeling clumsy in my mouth. "With a woman." A look of comprehension dawned on his face. "Oh, God, that's my sister. We just finished renovating her house. That was from the we finally have a working kitchen celebration dinner." He shook his head, a small, wry smile touching his lips. "So we've both been sitting here assuming the worst about each other." A bubble of something that felt dangerously like laughter was rising in my chest. It was absurd. All that torment, all that anxiety, was built on a foundation of mutual, unspoken fear. We were two idiots, sitting in the dark, both terrified of turning on the light. "So, the turbulence," he said, his gaze becoming serious again, intense. "When it started, and I saw how scared you were, all my stupid anxieties about saying the right thing just vanished. All I could think about was that I wanted to make you feel safe." He paused, searching my face. "And then, somewhere along the way, it became about more than that. Holding your hand. Leo, that wasn't about the turbulence. Not for me." The dam inside me broke. All the words I had swallowed, all the feelings I had suppressed, came rushing out. "It wasn't for me either," I said, my voice thick with relief. I've never felt anything like that. When you took my hand, it was the only thing that felt real. Everything else just disappeared." I looked down at my own hands, at the coffee cup I was clutching like a holy relic. "This morning, I was so sure I had imagined it all. That you regretted it, no," he said, his voice soft but firm. "Never. The only thing I regret is pulling away." He reached across the small space between us and gently took the coffee cup from my hands, setting it on the floor beside his. Then he took my hand, his fingers laced with mine, just as they had in the dark. The fit was just as perfect. The warmth was just as real. This time, there was no fear, no uncertainty. There was only a profound, overwhelming sense of coming home. He leaned forward, his eyes searching mine. "My flight isn't for another 3 hours," he said. "Yours?" "4," I breathed. He smiled, a real smile this time, one that lit up his entire face. "Good." He stood up, pulling me gently to my feet. He led me away from the crowded gate area, down a long, quiet concourse, until we found a deserted corner near a gate for a flight that wouldn't be leaving for hours. The space was empty, anonymous. He turned to face me, his hand still holding one of mine, his other hand coming up to gently cup my jaw. "Is this okay?" he whispered. I nodded, my heart soaring. And then he kissed me. It wasn't a tentative, questioning kiss. It was a kiss of certainty, of relief, of 1,000 unspoken words finally being said. It was deep and sure, and it tasted of coffee and the end of fear. It was the closing of a chapter of loneliness and the explosive, beautiful beginning of a new one. In the middle of a crowded airport, surrounded by the chaos of 1,000 different journeys, ours had just truly begun. A week later, we were sitting in a small, quiet coffee shop, one tucked away on a side street in my neighborhood. It was a place of comforting predictability, but everything felt new, seen through a different lens. The late afternoon sun streamed through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air and catching the gold flecks in Alex's eyes. He was telling me another story, this one about a client who wanted to build a house with no right angles, and the sound of his low, rumbling laugh was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. The awkwardness of that airport morning felt like a lifetime ago. It had been replaced by an easy, tentative rhythm, the gentle process of discovering another person. I learned that he took his coffee black, that he had a dog named Gus, and that he hummed, slightly off-key, when he was concentrating. He learned that I hated cilantro, that I organized my books by color, and that my calm, ordered apartment was a defense mechanism against a mind that was anything but. We were navigating the new dynamic, this fragile thing we were building together. It was a structure far more complex and terrifying than any library he could design or any pristine layout I could create. It was messy and unpredictable, and it required a level of vulnerability that still sent shivers of panic down my spine. But every time he reached for my hand across the table, every time he gave me that soft, reassuring smile, the fear receded a little more. We walked through a park after coffee, the autumn leaves crunching under our feet. The silence between us was comfortable now, filled not with anxiety, but with unspoken understanding. He pointed out the architectural details of the old brownstones that lined the park, his passion for his work evident in the way his eyes lit up. I found myself seeing the city, my city, in a new way, noticing the cornices and the brickwork I had walked past 1,000 times without a second glance. He was showing me his world, and in doing so, he was expanding mine. Later, back at my apartment, he was looking at the art on my walls. He stopped in front of a series of minimalist architectural prints. "I almost bought this one," he said, pointing to a stark, black and white rendering of the Salk Institute. I love the symmetry. The order, I smiled. That's why I bought it. I like order. He turned to look at me, his expression tender. Me too, he said. But I'm learning that the most beautiful things are often the ones that mess up your plans. He stepped closer, closing the distance between us. He smelled of coffee and the crisp autumn air, a scent now layered over the familiar sandalwood that I would forever associate with feeling safe. He put a hand on my waist, pulling me gently against him. Are you sure you're okay? He murmured, his voice a low thrum against my chest. No turbulence here? I laughed, a real, uninhibited sound. The callback to that terrifying, life-altering flight was a private joke, a shared piece of our history. It was a reminder of the chaos that had brought us to this moment of profound peace. No turbulence, I said, leaning into his warmth. Just clear skies that night. As he slept beside me in my bed, I lay awake for a long time, just watching him. The moonlight cast a silver glow on his face, softening the strong lines of his jaw. His breathing was deep and even, a steady, reassuring rhythm in the quiet of my apartment. My meticulously ordered space now contained the beautiful, unpredictable chaos of another human being. His shoes were by the door, his jacket was slung over a chair. My life was no longer a collection of straight lines. I thought about the man I was just a week ago, the man who white-knuckled his way through life, convinced that the only way to be safe was to be alone. I had built my walls so high, not to keep others out, but to keep myself in, to contain the messy, anxious parts of me I was sure no one would ever want to see. I had treated connection like a museum piece, something to be admired from afar, but never, ever touched. Alex hadn't just touched me. He had held on. He had seen me at my absolute worst, a trembling, panicked mess, and he hadn't run away. He had stayed. He had reached into the storm and pulled me out, not by being a perfect, unflappable hero, but by showing me his own vulnerability, his own fear. A chance seating arrangement, a patch of bad weather. The trajectory of my entire life had been altered by random chance. But it wasn't chance that mattered. It was the choice we both made in that darkened cabin, the choice to reach out, to hold on, to trust a stranger. It was the terrifying, exhilarating risk of letting the walls come down. Lying there, listening to the steady sound of his breathing, I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that it was the best, most important choice I had ever made. I was no longer an observer of my own life. I was finally, breathtakingly, in it. And I wasn't alone.